This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back inside the paint. Lots of questions, lots of comments to get to as we roll on here. David Triana asked a question I want to get to in a minute. By the way, David, I got your DM. I'm going to get to that coming up a little bit as well. But a Bucks fan asks this, and I'm just going to throw this out to you, Ira, between now and tomorrow. Do the Heat make a deal? And over-under trades that the Heat make between now and tomorrow, 0.5. Are you taking the over or the under?
I'll take the over for this reason, Clay. The last 2 years at the deadline they have, so there's a pattern there. You spoke about in the first segment here on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint, how they made the moves for Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala, the Justice Winslow trade 2 years ago, paid dividends. Last season, they made a couple of trades right before and then at the deadline, trading Myers Leonard to Oklahoma City for Trevor Ariza. Worked out reasonably well. And then the trade where they made the move with Chris Silva and Mo Harkless to Sacramento for Nemanja Bjelica. Thank God I don't have to type that in either now anymore. And that was sort of uneven. Clearly not the player he was before or since has emerged, Nemanja, with the Golden State Warriors. But they made the subtle moves. There weren't the blowaway moves. There also was the trade for Victor Oladipo with, last year at the trading deadline where they moved Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley. And I got to be honest, that surprised me. Kelly Olynyk was playing very well alongside Bam Adebayo as a starter. And I've always been a big Avery Bradley fan. And to be honest with you, I still am right now. I think he's one of the decent parts of the Lakers. So there were a couple of pieces I didn't think would get moved. But the difference is the Heat don't have those mid-tier contracts this year, the Kelly Olynyk contract. The only contract similar to Kelly Olynyk is Duncan Robinson. Well, for as much of a role as Kelly Olynyk played last year, Duncan Robinson the last 3 years has played a much bigger role. So I think they could do something small where it might be Akpala and some sort of pick and maybe just get better or even just open a roster spot for the buyout deadline March 1st. But I'm not so sure that they want to put into play right now someone like, if they don't have to, Duncan Robinson. I guess that'll be a name we'll follow, and I'm sure after Pat Riley will go, why did you keep mentioning him? I don't get that.
So David asked this, and I think it kind of goes along with what you just said. When you make a trade, is there a concern of shaking up the team chemistry? Is there a concern of shaking up the locker room? And my take on that, and I'll see what your take is on this, the types of deals that we're talking about potentially for the Heat are not the type of deals that would shake up a locker room. They're not the type of deals that would shake up team chemistry.
I don't think.
Because
but chemistry
you're looking at the landscape, and I'm not seeing the type of deal that, okay, so let's talk about some of the names that are out there, right? And would these moves even make sense for the Heat, or would they make any sense for the teams potentially making a deal? You look at Boston, and there's been talk about breaking up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I don't think that's going to happen before tomorrow because they're playing better together. They've been playing Jason Tatum more at the one, so it's kind of working out a bit.
Playing very well, yeah.
But they wouldn't send one of those players to Miami. Like Boston isn't sending one of two potential all-star / superstar type players to Miami. So you're not trading a type of player in that sort of a deal, and you're not bringing in a type of player that has the sort of cachet, the sort of personality that's going to shake up a locker room.
Well, first, I disagree with the premise you don't trade within your division or within your conference in the NBA when 10 teams make the playoffs anyway. And we're seeing that with the Harden Ben Simmons talk. I mean, there wouldn't even be conversation if the thought was we're not going to make a conference rival better. I think you do what's best for your team. You understand it's a huge playoff picture. To eliminate playoff competition, you're eliminating a third of the league now with 10 teams in each conference making the play-in your conference. So I don't see that as much, but to make a big deal, you have to give back a big piece. In other words, Clay, we're talking all season, you and I, because of the money, about Duncan Robinson. I guess the other piece we would be talking about is this. Would you trade Tyler Hero? Now, here's the deal. And again, this goes back to what we spoke to a little bit about in the first segment. Tyler Hero is an absolute part of the core of this Heat team. It's not a big three this year, we've learned. It's become a big four. But Tyler Hero also is due for his rookie extension by next October. You will have to address it. You have luxury tax, you have salary cap, you might have Victor Oladipo to wind up paying. So you have to decide that also. Again, like I mentioned in the previous segment, I'm sure Big O will break this up in pieces. So if you're watching part 2 of the podcast, listen to part 1. Is that fair to 36-year-old PJ Tucker and 35-year-old Kyle Lowry to take the long view and say, well, we love what Tyler's doing now, but we might not be able to afford him? If you throw Tyler Hero into deals, and let's face it, Clay, you and I have spoken about when he was mentioned in the Bradley Beal trade, when he was mentioned last trade deadline in the Kyle Lowry trade permutations, that the Heat pulled back and said no. So the Heat have pieces, but that goes to exactly what you said. You lose your Tyler Tuesdays. You lose your sixth man. I don't know who's your energizer off the bench.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe it's someone you acquire. Maybe it's Max Strus. Maybe it's Gabe Vincent. That's the other part of it. So if you're asking me, if I'm around the league and you're saying, who am I calling the Miami Heat about? Well, I know they're not trading Butler, Adebayo, or Lowry. They're off the table. I'm curious about Duncan Robinson. I might ask. I'm curious about Omer Yurtseven. I might ask. And if I'm paying for this phone call anyway, I'm going to ask about Tyler Hero and see what it takes. So to your Jaylen Brown sort of, possibilities or not in this case, I think that's the name where it starts. And what's crazy is I probably summarily hang up. But the Kings didn't with Tyrese Halliburton, which I don't see. So you just never know until you ask. And a matter of fact, Bobby Marks mentioned this, and some other people mentioned this at ESPN. So many people around the league didn't even know Halliburton was available. So I wonder if the Heat knew if Halliburton was available, would they have entered that sweepstakes also? They couldn't have offered us a bonus, but they might have been able to offer something younger along the way to Sacramento. So I guess you never know until you ask. So please, people, you can call him. Most of you, I guess, are on Clay's DMs anyway. You can call him in the morning tomorrow. You will hear names mentioned because people will call the Heat about them. That's what you do. You will hear names mentioned because the Heat call teams about them. Maybe like Tyrese Halliburton when they found out he was available. Like, whoa, before you talk to Indiana, how about X, Y, and Z? But just because you talk, 99% of talk never happens. But you will hear names out there, like you mentioned in the first segment about PJ Washington.
And that doesn't mean that it's false reporting when names are circling. It just, what the level of interest is from one side versus the other. And I've mentioned this on the show before, but the way Pat Riley explained this one time made a lot of sense to me, that, Andy Ellisberg's on chat threads with various front office people throughout the league, and they talk about a bunch of stuff. They'll talk about politics. They'll talk about, I'm sure, movies, entertainment, stuff like that. But ultimately, basketball names are mentioned, and then they'll go off in more private chats and go back and forth. And so that's kind of when you hear a name, oh, such and such is talking about such and such. Well, it could have easily been in one of these chats. Indiana and Sacramento were talking about a De'Aaron Fox centric deal, and they said, sure, hey, just off. We're assuming you're not going to include Tyrese Halliburton,
right?
But that's
perfect.
Are we wrong? So. That's the way a lot of this stuff
goes. And Clay,
so
I want to give you the perfect example of that. Several years back, God, I'm aging myself here. Pat Riley went out to meet with the Lakers about possibly running their organization, spoke to the late Dr. Jerry Buss about what they might do next. And during that conversation, if you remember 2005, it came up, what about Shaq? Is he available? Yeah. Pat didn't leave there to recruit Shaq or anything. But when Pat Riley found out that Shaq was available, and he said, okay, what about Lamar Odom? No, we want more. What about Lamar Odom and Brian Grant? No, we want more. What about Lamar Odom, Brian Grant, and a first-round pick? No, we want more. Okay, Caron Butler, deal done. Yeah. So they didn't go out there talking about even a trade. They went out there, like you said, talking about something tangential, and then it comes up. Those conversations will happen. I don't think it's a stretch, Clay, and I think you would agree to say that Andy Ellisberg will be speaking in some form to 29 other teams between now and 3 p.m. on Thursday.
And names are going to come up. So this is let's break this down to where people can understand it. We're trying to do this in a way where we're not boring you with numbers, but just knowing where the levels of where the numbers are. If you're talking about a Jaylen Brown, you could potentially get there. And again, there's been no mention of Jaylen Brown with the Heat. So just
right.
But letting contract-wise. You could potentially get there with a Duncan Robinson contract plus maybe a Hero. You have to look at the numbers here because of what this out. You could potentially get to a contract of that level. You have nothing that can get you, unless there's a 5-team deal, there's almost no way for you to get a player on a James Harden type contract, a Damian Lillard type contract,
Yeah,
unless you're
because
going to
you have
give
to
up
build.
what have you
I
been
don't know
for
how
him.
you build 44 million without throwing in Adebayo or Butler or Lowry, and I don't think you're. Well, on one hand, I don't think you're hurting your chemistry, but maybe one of those names is such that Pat Riley says, you know, I promised you something, but I also have to make a promise to my fans and my constituency, and I think this is a deal that'll make us significantly better. So maybe one of those pie in the sky names you mentioned. You know, Bradley Beal's injured now. Actually,
Yeah.
Damian Lillard's injured right now, so it makes it a little bit tougher. But if there's an offer, again, we're talking Godfather here. If there's an offer Pat Riley can't refuse, he will not summarily refuse it. Do I think he's trading Jimmy Butler? Hell no. Trading Bam Adebayo? Hell no. Trading Kyle Lowry? Hell no. But you know what? Everyone has their price, right, Clay? I mean, I don't know. You know, if Nikola Jokic was offered for Bam Adebayo, and please, no one's saying that he was, you would at least give it pause and think about it. If they
You
were
have to.
offered Joel Embiid, you'd think about it. There are players who are better than your players. You have to be realistic also.
Yeah. So when you hear these names, ask yourself these questions. Number one, does this make sense to the other team? And this is the thing that always bugs me is when people put up their trade machine result. Who says no? Well, the other team says no because you're offering a second round pick for an all NBA player. Like, be realistic about this. So, number one, ask yourself, does this deal make sense for the other guys? Number two, ask yourself, do these numbers even work? And that's where the trade machine does kind of make a little bit more sense because you can look at it and say, okay, well, there's no way for us to get there with the James Harden type contract unless we're including a player like a Butler, a Kyle Lowry, and plus, you know what I mean? So, like, be realistic about this stuff. So there are two things here. Nothing is impossible, but what's realistic and what makes sense. And again, sometimes stuff that makes sense comes out of nowhere, like you couldn't have even potentially imagined. But the Tyrese Halliburton thing, as much as we're looking at it saying, oh my goodness, what are the Kings even thinking?
Correct.
You can at least look at it and say, okay, well, that's not it's not something that a fan made up on a message board just to try to make Indiana better, even though I have no clue what Sacramento was saying. So be realistic about it. And by the way, Ira wants to do this rapid fire. I really like it. Last segment of the show, just throw out names and whether you think it's somebody the Heat could be interested in. And we'll kind of look at it from that perspective. Does it make sense from a Heat perspective? Does it make sense from the other team's perspective? And would the numbers be such that it could even work? So we'll do that in the last
Which will
segment
either make it work or it'll be like those insipid shows where they do fantasy football. Okay, I got two players in PPR and I need to play one of them. You've done that. You've driven around town listening to those.
Oh, I do because I turn it off immediately. Like, what do you guys? But this is different because this is okay. We're not talking about your fantasy team. I hate to tell you this. Nobody cares about your fantasy team. Like, I'm sorry.
Right. We're talking about your Miami Heat. We're collectively in this together.
Exactly. So feel free to throw out some names out there because I think everybody is at least on some level interested in what the Heat are doing. Before we get to that, and I want you guys to load up those names because we're going to do it in the last 15, 20 minutes of the program. I want to look at what's going on around the league and some of the big names, many of whom we've already just mentioned. But the one trade that I thought would never happen, that now I'm starting to think maybe there's a chance it does, James Harden for Ben Simmons. And it seems like there's enough there that before I thought there was no way that Daryl Morey would be able to pull off something like this. But I guess I never took into consideration the fact that James Harden may just want out of Brooklyn. And there's enough that's coming out right now from Harden's side that he's at least considering leaving in the offseason. And you don't do that unless you're considering leaving in the offseason.
It's all being leaked.
And you don't do that unless you want your front office to know, I'm considering leaving in the offseason and you would get nothing. So do you want to try to get something for me now?
Yeah, the one thing I don't get about the James Harden thing is, and he's not having a great season, and I think he's 33 or so, and he's looking for some 5-year, $250 million extension after this year, is this. Will he ever be happy? Remember, not by his choice, but he got moved from Oklahoma City to Houston. He basically forced his way out by playing 3 weeks of basketball where he couldn't have given a crap about what happened, forced his way to the trade to Brooklyn, was the happiest person ever. The big three, this is going to happen. Then Kyrie and the vaccine happened, and I get it. But is he ever going to be happy? So if James Harden forces his way, and clearly the manipulation here that's going on with all the NBA insiders having their inside people. No, these are people trying to do things. This is Rich Paul trying to get Ben Simmons somewhere where he's happy. This is James Harden people trying to get him somewhere where he's happy. This is Daryl Morey trying to play up the value of Simmons, play up the desperation of the Nets so he doesn't have to throw in a Maxey or a Tybal or someone like that into the trade. Everyone's being played. And because of the way social media works for all these networks, these guys love it. This couldn't be any better for Woj or for Shams or anyone. They're getting their stuff out there. They're getting their clicks. But everyone's being so manipulated. But the one thing I come down to is this. Is James Harden ever going to be happy? Do you think just because now he goes there?
Oh,
James Harden is happy when he's in a strip club.
Oh.
So let's move a team inside Tootsie's, and you'll have a 50-point scorer. I've set it up.
So are you saying that based on what I'm wearing right now, that James Harden would be happy in my guest room? Is that
right now there? Sure, Magic Mike and his friends, and we're all good right there. That's the whole thing about it. I'm sick of James Harden, and I'm sick for one reason, and even Ben Simmons to a degree also. Since when did quitting on a team become acceptable, Clay? We talk about this with all the coaching changes and whether you need to motivate. So much is on the player. Ben Simmons quit on the Sixers this season. Didn't want to play for them. People criticized him bypassing the layup. His feelings were hurt. We got into his feelings. Now all of a sudden, James Harden looks at it and goes, you know what? In the big three, I might be the third guy. I at least want to be the second guy with Joel Embiid. And he seemingly has stopped playing. Not that he ever played defense in the first place. I'm sick of those kind of guys. You get traded, maybe you're sad. Tyrese Halliburton sent a nice message to people in Sacramento. Domantas Sabonis played as hard as he could until he was traded. He knew very much that he was, in the trade machine, that he was mentioned as being moved. CJ McCollum, same thing. Played as hard as he could for Portland. Knew all season he was being mentioned in trades. But you're a professional. But this Harden stuff is almost an annual kind of thing that he wants somewhere else. And none of this is by accident, James Harden's name being out there. It is leaks and leaks and leaks, like almost everyone needs to get their roof repaired.
What is Kevin Durant thinking right now, too? I mean, I know Kevin Durant can be a bit moody and,
yes.
He has it. And yet, I gained so much respect for him, Ira, last year during the playoffs and during the Olympics when, he was having to bear the load of Kyrie and James Harden getting hurt, trying to play through injury. He was doing stuff himself. Then he immediately gets on a plane, goes over to I gained so much respect for this guy's work ethic and what he's willing to do.
He won the Olympics for Team USA. You're right. So yes. Let me ask you this. We all have second thought. You've made a bunch of job moves in your career. I've done the same. Who are better teammates? Not talking about the team situation and all that, okay? Who are better teammates? Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, or Kyrie Irving and James Harden, as far as going to work each day, knowing a commitment to the game, a commitment to victory? Who are better teammates for Kevin Durant? Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green over here, or Kyrie Irving and James Harden over there? I think he made a mistake when he picked his teammates.
And let me add another one, and we're up against a break. We're going to take it right now. We're going to get to all your questions, your comments. We're going to do rapid fire after the break. Russell Westbrook. And I know Russ and KD did not get along. And I know Russ has been awful this year in LA. I've never once watched Russell Westbrook play and thought, that guy's not giving it everything he has. That guy's not. And what he has right now, there's not much left. And it's sad to watch. But I still feel like he's giving everything he has. So to that end, I have a lot of respect for him for that. I have a lot of respect for KD and, for his legacy. I hope he comes back and does well. Of course, not at the expense of the Heat going and potentially making a finals run. We're back after the break. Lots of questions. I promise we're going to get to them all coming up next right here on Inside the Paint.
We're not going to get